Emelia Perez. Hello and welcome back to the Reactivist Podcast. I'm Marlena Shivo. Why is everyone up in arms about this film? The only answer I have arrived at is politics. It's offensive to Mexico, apparently. It's also offensive to the LGBTQ community, which shocked me a little bit. The story is about the head of the drug cartel in Mexico, who is a man, but he wants to transition into being a woman. Okay, so the main character is played by an actual trans woman, an actress by the name of Carla Sofia Gascon, and the other main character is the lawyer that this main character recruits to help her transition, played by Zoe Saldana. This is our premise. Now, you would think that the LGBTQ community would be happy that there was representation of the trans community, but that is not the case because the character transitions sort of all at once. So some of the criticism that has come from the LGBTQ community is that it doesn't represent what it's really like to transition, because there's a whole journey there when it comes to hormones, and the surgeries don't all happen at once. But they have to remember, like, this is a film. It's not a documentary about being trans. There's a whole storyline here, and you kind of have to get through the transition part kind of quickly. I mean, everybody gets the idea of what's going on here. I actually feel a little bad for the lead actress, who's a trans woman. 13 Oscar nominations. It's a big deal. And for people to be dumping on it, you have people from GLAAD that are sort of denouncing this film because they don't think it bodes well for trans people. Meanwhile, the lead actress is trans, an actual trans woman, and took the role. So shouldn't you follow the lead's lead? I almost could maybe sort of see the trans community getting annoyed if they didn't have a trans person in that role. If they had an actual man playing the cartel boss and then a woman or a man dressed as a woman playing Pérez. Like, I could see that maybe bothering people, but you're talking about a woman who actually did this in real life, and she's fine with the film. So what's all the shitstorm about? You want representation, you want diversity, it's handed to you in Hollywood, and is up for 13 Oscar nominations, and you're pissed. It's not a documentary. It's like damned if you do, damned if you don't. So they're offended. Mexico's offended because they think it represents Mexico in a bad light because it's the cartel and it doesn't show Mexico in a good light. But the truth of the matter is, Mexico does have a cartel, and there is a lot of crime that happens in Mexico. The film isn't suggesting that this is all of what Mexico has to offer. It's just using that piece of it for this storyline. And let's face it, Mexico, it's not like your entire country is a resort in Cabo. Some of this is art imitating life. There is organized crime. There is corruption. So simmer down. Kind of reminds me of when The Sopranos was on HBO. It was an undeniable success. No one can say that The Sopranos was not a success. And you have a lot of Italian Americans in that show. And yet, complaints from the Italian American community about how they're represented as mobsters. It's a mob show. It's about mobsters. The show wasn't saying that everybody who's Italian is a mobster. It's a certain genre, right? So if you're going to make a movie about a cartel in Mexico, that's the piece that you're using. You're not saying all of Mexico is riddled with crime and corruption. I mean, I'm not going to say that right here, but that's not what the film is supposed to be saying. They're just using that piece of Mexico culture. Sopranos was using that piece of Italian American culture. It's pretty fucking simple. At one point during the film, Emelia Perez, who was the former cartel boss, wants her children back. She wants the kids to live with her. So she sends the same attorney that helped her transition to fetch her family in Switzerland where they were being protected and brought them back to Mexico. She obviously can't say who she really is because she faked her own death. So her kids think that she's dead. In order to not traumatize them, she says she's their father's cousin. There's criticism saying that this is so far-fetched and so out of the realm of being realistic. It's like, well, it's fiction. That part aside, I found it so true and telling that when the main character was a man and the head of the cartel, he was angry, he was violent, he committed a lot of crimes. And when she became Emelia Perez, you saw someone with a heart, someone who tried to almost make good on their past and was actually doing a service at this point in her life as a woman, not as the man. I'm just noting that part. The movie's tragic, not my kind of ending. I really actually thought I was going to see a happy ending. I don't know why. But it wasn't a happy ending in the end. There wasn't a ton of violence, but there was just enough for me to hate that. But that's my own personal thing. People aren't criticizing this film for being overly violent because it's not. They're criticizing it because of the representation of trans people and the representation of Mexico, and that it's far-fetched and unrealistic or something like that, which, again, it's fiction. I haven't read this anywhere, but it should be a little offensive to the category of musicals because I've seen many a musical in my day. And the musical part of this film, it was a little lackluster. The songs weren't very catchy. I like show-tuney tunes. It didn't have that vibe for me. Although that's not really the vibe of the movie, but that's just my personal preference. But that's besides the point. As far as the trans community or the LGBTQ community being pissed or feeling like it was an unfair representation of how someone transitions, interview the lead actress. She is a trans woman. She went through a transition. This is a film. It's not a documentary. You can't show all the phases of transitioning. And even in the film, there was a 4-year gap between the time the transitioning started to the time she was fully Emelia Perez. Put a disclaimer at the end of the movie. Most people who transition, or all people who transition, don't have all of their surgeries happen at one time. I mean, would that make people happier? It's not about what the transition process looks like. It's about the fact that this person was socialized to be one way and could not bear to live that way and did everything she could to become the person she was supposed to be. That's the message that was in that film. Why that's escaping the critics, I do not know. I thought it was also thought-provoking. Callous, drug cartel, violent man turned female philanthropist with a heart. Talk about a statement on society. You want violence? You want anger? You want crime? Here's all the men in the cartel, all the gangsters, right? You want heart, you want light, empathy, a certain level of philanthropy or, charity. It's like using your powers for good or evil, right? The man uses powers for evil and the woman used her powers for good. All the men should be pissed. How about that? Let's get them in here. Let's get all these men in here saying, oh, great, the man is the villain and the woman is the hero. That's right. But no matter what anybody says, no matter what all the critics say, no matter how many people are offended, Emelia Perez got 13 Oscar nominations and no one's taken them away. It just cannot make anybody happy anymore.